Hello, gentle listener. It is I, Argent Templar. And with that pretentious introduction, let's get to today's topic. So, Game of Thrones, degeneracy, and the High Sparrow. So I notice a lot of people just hate the High Sparrow. They hate him, and they say he's the worst person in the show. I've seen a lot of people white knight for Cersei and say that what he did to her was completely unacceptable. I will admit I haven't watched all of season 5, but I have read the books and I have read ahead. Episode summaries, I mean. So I roughly know what happens. So, excuse me. Basically, people have said that what he did was unacceptable and that he's the most evil person in the show. Now, why is that? Why is he the most evil person in the show? Because he's a religious figure, and in particular, he's a Catholic religious figure. The faith of the Seven is basically indistinguishable from Roman Catholicism, aside from the fact that instead of a trinity, you have a septinity. I don't know what a seven-headed god would be called, but you have the seven instead of the trinity. It is the seven who are one. So people call the High Sparrow the worst character in the most evil character in the show simply because he's religious. And if you go on the Game of Thrones forums or read any of the articles, they will say this. They will call him a religious zealot. They will say that he's evil. They will say he's if you go on the Game of Thrones forums, they have a High Sparrow appreciation thread, and someone says, "What's next?" The Ramsay Bolton appreciation thread, implying that he has no positive traits, no redeeming features, that he is as evil as Ramsay Bolton, who has no good aspects to him. Um, but the High Sparrow has a lot of good aspects to him. Even though in the show, in my opinion, they tried to drag him through the mud. They they wanted to make it more topical, so they added him like being against alcohol, which I don't remember being in the books at all, and they added him persecuting the gays because even though that didn't really happen in the books, because that's topical, that's in the news at the moment, and we have to try and make him as unsympathetic as possible. So people don't understand that before Obama became president, even homosexuality just wasn't that socially acceptable, and it's only been legal for like 30 years, and the Game of Thrones takes place during the Middle Ages. People don't understand that. They aren't aware of that. I blame outcome-based education. I blame comprehensive education and just public schools in general for failing to teach people things. People are also just stupid. People can't accept complexity. They can't accept ambiguity. Maybe that's being arrogant, but it's true, and I am nothing but a slave to the truth. So people can't accept that during the Middle Ages homosexuality wasn't seen as a good thing, and so he's evil for not complying with 1970s and late 2000s talking points about full equality. Um, which is interesting considering Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, and Gandhi did not support gay marriage. Actually, Gandhi probably didn't even support the legalization of homosexuality. I'd have to look at that, but it would be interesting. Most of the people that they hold up as like these martyrs of equality would not have supported gay marriage. But they're okay, they get a pass because that was um the expectation of the time, but the High Sparrow, despite coming like 500 years before those people in the fictional world, does not get a pass because he's a religious figure. Um, Although Martin Luther King Jr. was a pastor, but he gets a pass because he's black, I guess? I don't know. That's an interesting question. I guess because the High Sparrow is Catholic and not a liberal Protestant and white, he does not get a pass, and everything he does is evil. So the High Sparrow himself, what do I think of him? I like him. It's kind of ironic, and this is where the narrative kind of it gets confusing for me. Kind of the narrative, because part of Game of Thrones seems to be trying to drag Western civilization through the mud, and trying to say like um, the traditional Christian society of the Middle Ages was just as degenerate as today, even more degenerate. Everyone was an alcoholic. Uh, where everyone got the money to be an alcoholic is an interesting question. Everyone constantly used whores. Everyone cheated. There was no honor. There was no genuine faith. The few people who are religious are just fanatics and they're crazy. Everyone's just cynical and evil. And I'm not saying that that stuff didn't happen during the Middle Ages. I'm just saying I doubt every single person in the Middle Ages was a degenerate. I don't believe that there was no actual religious people during the Middle Ages, which is something I find in most of these period pieces is they basically just ascribe modern values onto people from the past, and because they're cynical about religion, they assume everyone else is. Um, so anyway, so this is it's so the reason the narrative gets confusing is because they basically are trying to say that because um, the Middle Ages was so degenerate and violent and cruel, we should hate ourselves and we should hate our civilization. But at the same time, the only person in the show who's really trying to clean this up, who's trying to end the massive like prostitution, to end the drunken debauchery, to end the everybody's having sex with everything, and to try and clean up corruption in government and actually care about the poor, is the High Sparrow. His movement is largely based around the peasantry. Basically, during the War of Five Kings, as you could see, the various armies lay waste to the countryside. They stole people's crops. They killed septons. They burned down churches. And I know people on the left just like to burn down churches. I'm not even really saying that to be sarcastic. I actually think they do. If my public school education was any indication, that's a fairly mainstream idea. They were probably pretty happy that the War of Five Kings devastated organized religion in Westeros. So um, they it came from that. So basically, the people are starving. You have corrupt as fuck government figures running the country. You have Cersei, who's a narcissistic sociopath. You had Tywin Lannister, who actually was a fairly competent minister, but was extremely brutal. You have Marjorie, who everyone feels bad for, but she's a cynical, self-serving, um, manipulative. Uh, she doesn't really care about the people. She pretends to care, but she's just doesn't have a genuine bone in her body. You have Jaime, who's a mess. Tyrion actually kind of cared about the people, but he's gone. If you just look at, because a lot of this was to like, as I said, to make fun of the ruling class, to talk about how degenerate the nobility was, to talk about how horrible they were and how bad their reign is and how corrupt they were. And the High Sparrow is basically trying to take them down. He took down Cersei, who is a whore who had sex with her brother and put her bastard born of incest, two of them on the throne, and killed the former king, and had sex with everything that moved, including members of the Kingsguard who are sworn to not have sex, as a way to gain more power. She also ordered Robert's bastard children, including a baby, killed. She killed Ned Stark for trying to enforce the proper rules of the realm. She's a fucking terrible person. And the High Sparrow takes her down. Ned doesn't take her down. Robb doesn't take her down. Tyrion doesn't take her down. Tywin doesn't take her down. The High Sparrow takes her down and takes Marjorie down. Marjorie, who, by the way, killed the former king. Sure, he deserved it, but she still committed regicide. And he's the only one who's cleaning up this den of iniquities, who's taking down all the corruption and the whoring and the drunkenness and just the complete debauchery and degeneracy of society. He's the only one who's doing anything. He's the only one who's trying to feed the peasants and gives a crap about them and is trying to give voice to the powerless. A big impetus for creating the Faith Militant is to provide an army to protect the peasantry from these marauding bands. Because at the end of medieval wars, they don't formally disband the army. They just tell everyone to go home. They just say, "Go home, guys. War's over. You're done." Um, so that shit happens, and the High Sparrow, no, sorry, so they just disband the army. They just tell them to go home. They don't often pay them, and then you have bands of soldiers wandering the countryside with little money, just terrorizing. And that in France, it actually got to the point where the royal armies were being defeated by bands of mercenaries left over from wars. And it leads to anarchy and civil disorder and destruction. And winter is coming, and there'll be 5 years of basically starvation and deprivation. And you have this simple man who's trying to get the nobility to do their fucking jobs, to take care of the people they're sworn to protect, who doesn't take comfort for himself. And I actually don't really care about that. I don't mind if leaders live in some degree of luxury. I don't mean excessive luxury, but if he wanted to like sleep on a nice bed and eat nice food and wear nice clothes, I'm fine with that. It doesn't bother me. But he, a man who's actually trying to live his faith, who's actually trying to help the peasantry, who's trying to make the leadership of the country do their job, and they condemn him because he's a religious figure. Because ultimately, a lot of the people on the left support everything that they're using to try and get people to hate their own civilization. So basically, it's all very disingenuous because they're saying, well, look at all this shit that happened during the Middle Ages, and this is what the Middle Ages were like. But if they ran society, this is what society would be like. So basically, they're trying to gear this towards, I guess, center-right people, kind of conservative people, and say, look at your precious Middle Ages, look at your precious traditionalist society, this is what it's like. But they themselves don't find an issue with this. They probably support, well, I've seen the forums, most of them support, like, Jaime and Cersei's the twincest, most of them support, like, shit Robert did, all the whoring around and stuff. They don't care about marriage. They don't give a shit about marriage. They don't care about drunken debauchery. They don't care about whoring. They think all this stuff should be legal anyways. And not only legal, but socially acceptable. Not only socially acceptable, but preferred. So, while they're trying to use this as a way to disparage the Middle Ages and disparage Western civilization, my civilization, at the same time they are they actively support this, and they attack as the worst person in the show the only person who is attempting to do anything about the degeneracy. So hopefully I made that point. I know the High Sparrow has problems. I know he does things I wouldn't do, particularly in the show where they like carve the 7-pointed star into people's foreheads. That's pretty fucked up. But at least he's doing something. And it's implying that like other people don't do that shit. Does anyone remember the Tickler, Tywin Lannister's torturing, the weird shit he'd do with like rats, and like heating up the bucket with the rat in it to like eat people alive? Anyone remember that? Yeah. See, it's okay if he does it, or it's like acceptable, but if a religious figure does it, that's bad. Anyways, this is Argent Templar signing out.